Hello and welcome to Views from the Market, mid-market private equity and M&A in Canada. My name is Mario Negro, and I'm a partner at Stikeman, Elliott. For today's podcast, I'd like to welcome our special guest, David To. David is the founder and managing partner of Linked Capital, and he's also the CEO at AT Safety Trading. David, welcome and thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Mario. It's a pleasure.
David, I always start our podcast by asking our guests a little bit about themselves and their history. So I'd love to start with learning a little bit more about you and your history, and then talk a little bit about Linked and obviously get to it's all exciting, but particularly the AT Safety Trading. So we'll start with a bit about your history and go from there.
Sure. Thanks, Mario. By way of background, born and raised in Toronto, in and around the GTA, sort of lived in different parts of the city, from the beaches to East York and all the way up to Markham. Come from a typical middle-income immigrant family. Spent a little bit of my early life in South America, but for the most part, don't remember that. I think growing up, always coming from a very loving family, hardworking parents. Father was a salesman and the mother was a cashier. But prior to coming to Canada, they were, of course, very entrepreneurial and ran businesses in different capacities in different parts of the world. And I think maybe some of that extended to me. Growing up, I, for some reason, fairly early on, decided that I was going to be an entrepreneur or in one way or another be in the business world. To be fair, I didn't take school too seriously, sort of wanted to rush through that process and did exactly that. Graduated with a diploma in international business and set my hearts on opening up a business right away. Started a small importing business. This is sort of before the days of Alibaba and sort of the ease of sourcing overseas. So it was a little bit more of a process back then. But of course, also started working in parallel to sort of pay the bills and get your feet wet as you're supposed to do. Ended up working in the imports business and serendipitously worked for brands like Adidas and Nike, and relatively quickly ended up with a European footwear brand, which was 100% family owned. And I realized very early that I enjoyed that environment a lot more than working for some of the larger corporate companies, and ended up staying with them for 16 years. As the corporate life starts to build momentum, spent 10 years in Canada and 10 years overseas as an expat before I decided to return to school and get an executive MBA at NCED, where I, of course, discovered search and very, very quickly came across you, Mario. I think you were one of the first calls I had in the industry, like so many of us.
David, you started a traditional search fund. Wasn't that long ago, but it seems long ago. Maybe tell us a little bit about that experience. I mean, you obviously ground it out. It wasn't easy, but you found a group of, I would say, really good cap people, of investors that kind of believed in you to kind of take it to the next level.
Yeah, so it was an interesting process for me. As you say, it wasn't easy by any means, but at the same time, I think when I reflect now from start to finish, it was very much in line with what you read, right? The statistical averages you get from the Stanford reports and so on and so forth. For a bit of context, when I first started exploring this space, I was in transition, still living in Singapore, exploring other opportunities with other partners that I had met during my NCED program, but decided to come back to Canada and felt like that made more sense for myself and the family, and started thinking about raising a search fund circa sort of December. Not the best time, right, to be thinking about reaching out to investors. But that process took me about 3 months, start to finish, from pushing out a PPM, obviously with your help to a large extent, getting in contact with the appropriate investors, and then just really picking up the phones and introducing myself. So I know a lot of searchers who sort of start that process a little bit earlier, getting in front of more investors. I sort of started my process really from day one almost. I consider that having early discussions, not earlier than November, finishing that raise at the end of March.
David, you raised a traditional search fund successfully, and then you went out to look for a deal. I know from our conversation, you looked at a lot of different industries, and you ended up finding a really, really great business. Tell us a little bit about how you found AT Safety Trading and the kind of process that led to the acquisition of AT Safety Trading.
Sure. So, of course, some of the advice you get when you're new in the space and speaking to others is, of course, talk to as many searchers as you can and sort of understand what processes they worked, what worked for them, what didn't work for them. And also as part of preparing for this journey, obviously create a PPM. And as part of that, there's a thesis building exercise. So I did all of that, as you should. And as part of the exercise, put together a list I think it was somewhere around 16 to 20 different sectors that I had pre-researched and had prepared. And this was sectors that I was going to look into. I tried to have sectors that not only met all the criteria that a nice traditional search fund target should in terms of recurring revenue, size, available businesses in our market, etc., but also that might fit my profile and it would make sense for an investor. And also, of course, obviously something that I would be passionate about. I come from a more, say, old world economy sector in terms of my career experience, right, in unit economics type businesses. So I had a lot of, let's say, traditional businesses on my list. When I started, we burned through that list in like 3 weeks. I had prepared a tech stack that could run a quite high volume of email campaigns. In hindsight, I probably overbuilt that tech stack and was a bit too optimistic about how many targets I would be able to find and identify.
And David, how much time were you spending proprietary versus sell-side advisory in terms of your search?
So at the beginning, I would say I spent quite a lot of time before the fund launched developing the tech stack and preparing the list. And that starts to run. So that engine starts to go out pretty quickly. I had 2 interns as well. So from a timing standpoint, relatively low. And when you're new, you're also out there reaching out to obviously a lot of brokers and you're getting a lot of deal flow that's coming from everyone. Everyone's got a deal at the bottom of their drawer, that they dust off and they send over to you. And it's great because you get your reps reviewing things, having conversations with not only the advisors, but also obviously sellers in some cases. That was sort of the first, I would say, 4 to 6 weeks, maybe let's call it 2 months. But then, of course, your email engine starts to deliver returns, right? Your campaigns start to get optimized. You're sort of on your second, third contact from your proprietary. So I'd say the second 3 to 4 months or 2 to 3 months then shifted more to the proprietary conversations, right? So I would say all in all, if you look at, say, the first 6 months, it was probably 50-50, but it was sort of front loaded with the broker conversations first, and then more conversations with the proprietary discussions in the second half of the 6 months.
And tell us about how you found AT safety trading.
Yeah, so one of the things that you learn pretty quickly as you're running through all of your different industries is that there are a lot of industries you've never heard of, right? And you discover accidentally. And you do hear those stories from time to time from various sellers. And this was exactly the case. This was a proprietary deal that came, I know specifically where it came from. I was running a campaign for emergency products distribution. So effectively distributors of any type of product or service that is in the emergency sector. So think about PPE, think about medical equipment, et cetera, et cetera. And that is a very small component of what AT Safety does. So they do sell and supply some first aid equipment, some safety devices, but that's not the core of the business. But it was captured in my funnel, in my list building exercise. And when the seller responded to me, she explained very quickly that, that was not the core of the business and that safety training services was the core of their business. Then all of a sudden you learn, right? You do a rapid research and understanding the space, understanding who the competitors are and so forth. And it's a little bit of luck, but I think I like to be a lucky leader and a lucky business person. I'll take that any day of the week, right?
And David, it was a proprietary deal, a safety trading or sell-side advisor?
100% proprietary.
And, obviously proprietary deals require more commitment in the sense that you've got to kind of really build the relationship with the owner. Because I know that was a key part of this deal is you really built the relationship of trust with the owners to kind of move this forward. I mean, that's what I saw. You can tell me otherwise, but I thought one of the great things you did was really kind of, made the owners understand that you were going to take care of their business and you were kind of an honest broker who was going to really treat their business with the respect it deserved.
I think the relationship you have with the seller early on is obviously critical. Building trust and going at the pace in which they're comfortable with is, in my view, one of the most important factors in having a successful close. I had, of course, also an advantage in the sense that the seller was prepared, right? She had had exploratory discussions and even some attempts to transact within the prior 12 to 24 months. So she wasn't completely new, right, to the process. And she had our financials ready. She understood that she needed to share them early on. And of course, she was also comfortable sharing them early on. Although we were sort of paced with the way we engaged, at the very beginning, things were able to get to a certain level of transparency pretty quickly. And that was very, very helpful. So we took a phone call, explained what search funds were. She wasn't familiar with the model. But yes, you're 100% correct. I mean, I positioned search funds for what the value brings to the market and the role that we play, being that sort of sweet spot between, say, an independent entrepreneur or a strategic buyer and versus the private equity, and my commitment to protecting legacy. And also in that context, leaning into my history, having a long career with a family-owned enterprise, I think gave some credibility to that narrative, which again helped build some trust. But along the way, it was fairly early in my process. So I myself wasn't too rushed with the process, right? I took a time, despite the fact that it was a proprietary deal. I chose to run a process that offered her an EOI first. And she had sort of a sense to look at how I would approach the whole thing. And from there, we sort of went to an LOI and so on and so forth. So we took sort of gate checks along the way so that by the time we were in quote unquote hard negotiations, to be honest, it wasn't much of a negotiation. Most of the terms were already pre-aligned. I obviously visited the site, met her husband at dinner, all that good stuff. So it did take some time, but it was a good pace from both sides, I would say.
When you look back now, Dave, what was the greatest challenge of getting this deal done? You obviously dealt with investors, dealt with an owner. You're obviously trying to build the thesis for this opportunity. When you look back, what was the greatest challenge you had in terms of getting this deal over the line?
The challenge, of course, and you might remember this, Mauro, was sort of near the tail end, trying to align the timing of when we were trying to close this deal with, I think, for me, a lack of appreciation of the seasonality of the business and how busy the business was at the exact, not only months, but literally weeks of when we were trying to close this. And that injected a huge amount of stress from the seller side, trying to juggle the business while transacting. And again, with it being a proprietary source deal without a sell-side advisor, was very, very conscious of the challenges that brings to a transaction and being respectful of, again, trying to maintain pace and momentum while at the same time understanding that there's an extra degree of time that needs to be given between every sort of interaction. I think moving forward, or if I was to have an opportunity to revisit this process, I would have probably encouraged stronger for a sell-side advisor. I did mention it and I did suggest it, but it was ultimately her decision and she chose not to have one. And I think it would have been helpful. I probably would have pushed for it a little bit harder.
I remember one of the challenges you had to deal with was, this was an owner who, she had an emotional attachment to the business. And it obviously showed itself during the transaction, even at the end, where it's hard to let go. It's their baby. They birthed it and they took care of it. Tell us a little bit about that challenge, because you had to manage that process of kind of, dealing with a lot of attachment to their business.
I think that's going to be the case oftentimes, Mario, with most businesses in the space that we work with. They've had the business from zero and oftentimes, obviously, for decades. And also bearing in mind the proposition and the way that I promote myself as a potential buyer is that we're going to protect that legacy, is that we're going to build on the platform and we recognize the value. And you can't just say that, right? I mean, you actually have to behave that way and demonstrate it. So those challenges are innately, I think, a part of this sector, right? In this industry. And I think for any searcher, you have to think about that and really appreciate the fact that it's not just words, or something on your website or something on your deck, that you have to be prepared that that's a two-way street. And if a seller is very emotional, well, you have to be prepared to navigate that and be supportive even after the deal is closed, to be honest. And it's a fluid situation, ultimately.
David, you've now been running the business for a few months. You've been on the front lines, just dealing with all the issues that come with being a CEO of a middle market business. Want to get your thoughts and reflections on what you've seen so far. What are obviously the greatest rewards, but also the greatest challenges you've seen in this part of this process, which is kind of now driving growth, right?
I think first off, it's been a phenomenal first 90 days, first 100 days, if you put it that way. One of the important things to recognize that this is a service business. It's a people business. We have 35 employees that are handling hundreds of direct interactions every single day with customers. And what I'm most pleased about is the employees here are just phenomenal. I mean, they're all super passionate. They're all super professional. They're true industry experts. The feedback that we get from our students and our customers are really, really rewarding. And on top of that, the cherry on top is feel proud of what we do. We do good. I mean, what we're doing every single day is teaching people how to stay safe and in many cases even save lives. And that's something that I think gives us some energy to wake up every single morning. And fairness is new to me, right? I came from, call it more traditional consumer-based sector where, yes, you feel good about what you do and you feel good about the team you work with, but I was selling shoes, right? And now we're educating people to stay safe at work and get home to their families every day. So that's been phenomenal. And of course, the business is great. It's also why we're attracted to it. But the opportunities are also something I'm excited about.
Can I ask you, what are the growth opportunities for this business? Is it M&A? Is it organic? Where do you see this business going?
I think there's always a multitude, right? It is a highly fragmented space. So to your point on M&A, I think there are clearly opportunities there for some traditional roll-up activity. There is organically already been some conversations opened, right? When a business of our reputation, industry this size gets transacted, people coming out and reach out right away. I've had 3 or 4 already that I think are interesting. But more organically, there is opportunities within different sectors that we're just not participating in. IT Safety today has a very strong presence in delivering service within the industrial sector with larger clients. But there are other sectors where we definitely can become more relevant and would make sense for us to do so. So both on a channel, but in geographic context, there's plenty of opportunities still. But yes, you're right. There is, let's say, opportunities within M&A that are very attractive as well.
David, I want to thank you for being our guest. It's great to learn about your history, about the creation of Linked Capital, and more importantly, about the success story of both acquiring AT Safety Training and now seeing it grow in your hands as CEO. So thank you for telling us your story, and congratulations on a great story.
Thank you, Mario. And I know everybody says it, but thank you very much for everything that you do for the space. And for me personally, another one that definitely owes you a huge amount for helping me in my journey.
Thank you for tuning in to Views from the Market. Stay updated with the latest episodes by subscribing wherever you find your podcasts or visiting stikeman.com/viewsfromthemarket.